The Portland area has some of the best growing conditions in the country. It's why we have exceptional local produce and just like great food in general. But did you know that a few crops can only be found in Portland and are at risk of disappearing? And some I'm sure you've never even tasted or heard of. So today on CityCast Portland, food historian and co-host of CityCast Las Vegas, Sarah Lohman, is joining us to talk about some of our area's rarest foods, where we can find them, and what we can do to keep them alive. It's Thursday, April 4th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Sarah, do you remember you were supposed to speak at Powell Books a few months ago, but the ice storm, and I remember how hopeful you were. You were just like, no.
We tried.
It's going to happen. But I knew.
You knew.
Like, I called it that morning because I've lived here for a long time.
I knew too. And there was a part of me that's like, let's just cancel it. I'll figure out when I can come back. But you know what? I'm thinking my paperback comes out in October, so maybe I'll day trip back up to Portland and we'll do it then.
Okay, cool. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
So, you wrote a whole book about this, but can you explain the concept of endangered eating to listeners who haven't heard of that concept before?
Sure. I mean, so the title of my book is Endangered Eating, America's Vanishing Foods. And it was inspired by this online encyclopedic reference called the Arc of Taste. The Arc of Taste is put together by Slow Food International, and it is a list internationally, I think, nearing 1,000. In America, over 300 items that are considered delicious and distinctive and rare. And rare can mean endangered. Rare can mean on the verge of extinction. Rare can just mean hyper-local as well, too, that you have to go to a place and a people in order to be able to experience this food. And I think that in the case of at least the foods that I wrote about, it also meant really deeply connected to a culture. And I'm an American food historian, as well as podcast host on CityCast Las Vegas. But so my passion is really America, like all of the diversity and complexity within this country. So that is what I focused on for this book.
Cool. Yeah, I read your book.
Thank you.
And the chapters that really stuck with me, I mean, they're all of them, honestly. But the two that I think it was just more of a personal thing, like the dates. Like I had no idea there was so much variety in dates.
My favorite is Shields. Do you have a favorite?
I realized that I don't know. Like, I'm just like, I just eat dates. I didn't know. I mean, I've heard of the medjool, the medjool date. And then the D one, I forget one, something.
Deglet Noir.
That one.
Boom.
But I mean, I learned about so many. And now I want to know about all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You will taste them until you get sick, because when you go to those like date gardens we're talking like Palm Springs, Coachella Valley, they have samples out because a lot of these dates are not found anywhere else on the planet.
Yeah. The reason I bring up the dates is because a lot of the American foods were brought here. But because America is America, and either it made it commercially or it's just made in one very, like you said, one localized area, like the dates in Palm Springs area.
And that's climate, too, because basically these botanists noticed that the climate of Coachella Valley was almost exactly like the Arabian Peninsula.
Exactly. So that's why I found the American parts so different, because like, let's go into the Oregon's rare foods. Like one of them is the Spanish Roja garlic. And when I saw that, I was like, Spanish Roja garlic, obviously not native to this area.
We do have alliums, I would say, right?
But this specific.
Like other than wild garlic, yes, we don't have that. But now that you're saying it, I don't super know why it's called Spanish Roja. I suspect that it is not actually Spanish. I think that it was probably a name given to like intrigue and delight. And probably considering the time period, according to the Arc of Taste, because every entry in the Arc of Taste has this little essay, this vetted essay that goes along with it. But Spanish Roja is really spicy. And so I think it's like the 19th century, it's Oregon, and people are like, well, it's the spicy red garlic. We're going to call it Spanish Roja. Because it's still about like commercialization and selling it, right? And it is a really good garlic. It is very known for its intensity of flavor. But then when you like slow roast it, it is the most like sweet, it's just so good, like complex, like buttery garlic that I've ever like had the pleasure of slow roasting. I once did a 12 garlic tasting with a couple friends, and it was not the best idea, but it wasn't the worst idea.
After the sixth garlic, though, after the sixth clove, where you're just like, it tastes like garlic.
No, that's the thing. It's like the dates. There's all these varieties that are different and unique. So it's like Spanish Roja, was kind of born and bred in around the Portland, Oregon area. And it's like a wonderful thing to put in your garden. And also I've been told that it's a decent like pest repellent too.
Oh.
That if you grow garlic throughout your garden, you've got less trouble with pests.
Yeah. And so Greek blue is an alternative name that arose around the same time, which I thought was interesting.
That's funny. Spicy cultures too.
So I've had Spanish Roja. I didn't know it was called Spanish Roja.
Yeah,
you could get it at farmers markets, and it's so spicy. It was so good. And I actually was just like, well, this is really good garlic. And then I didn't know that it was super different. I just was like, garlic, Yeah. So this was nice to know. I was like, oh, and I also didn't know it was like endemic to Portland. Like I didn't know that this was our garlic. That's so crazy, especially because it's called Spanish Roja. It should be called something cooler, like, I don't know.
You can talk to the farmers,
What's red and in Portland?
Right.
I don't know.
Communicates like the idea of spice.
Someone listening, come up with something better.
And that's like an equally excellent way of supporting these sort of, like in the case of Spanish Roja, these really localized foods or these rare foods or these culturally important foods is just buying them, right? Just going to the farmer's market and buying a nice little treat for yourself.
And maybe growing it in your yard. I mean, I was like, well, why aren't we just selling this, in the supermarkets? And then, of course, like a lot of these foods, they're susceptible to bruising. They're delicate. Yeah. Their storage life isn't, going to last a cross-country trip. Like, there's just a lot going against it.
They don't fit into our industrialized agriculture system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is cool. Do you know, like, where it originally came from?
I don't think it is known. I mean, that's the thing with food history. Like, people didn't necessarily think that it was important enough to write down. And I think with a lot of these foods, too, it's about deciding, like, when it becomes what it truly is. Like, where's the evolution point? And I've had Spanish Roja that's grown on the East Coast, too. But, like, I'm sure that the flavor profile is a little bit different than when you take it out of its home, right? So especially in the 19th century, farmers could get rich by coming up with a really delicious variety of blank. Apples were a big one. Apples were millionaire makers, but tomatoes were as well. And I think someone was basically trying their hand at garlic and came up with this variety that has sustained and lasted this long.
Wow. I just love that Portland has its own garlic. And probably nobody knew,
Get out there and get some. I mean, to be suspiciously named Spanish Roja and Greek Blue, I do think that there's like a little stereotypical xenophobia in those names now that we dig down into it. So like maybe we do come up with a new name for it.
Like rose garlic, because, red. City of Roses?
Sure, but roses just feel like gentle and romantic, and this garlic wants to punch you in the face.
All right. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask about was Aunt Molly's ground cherry, which is the funniest name for a ground cherry.
Yeah, which apparently this varietal was named after their favorite dog. So you know what? Yes, that's great. So, all right. So this is a local cultivar of a really fascinating plant. Have you ever had a ground cherry before?
No. I mean, I saw them and I just thought they looked like little like orange or yellowish tomatillos. They look like.
They're in the tomatillo family. Yes. And they're also related to, do you know that like it's usually in dried floral arrangements, the Chinese lantern, and it has this like papery husk. All close relatives. So Aunt Molly's ground cherry, they're like tiny tomatillos. And when they ripen, they're sort of bright orangey yellow. And they do have a familiar that is related to tomatoes, but is much sweeter. Like they feel much more like the fruit family that they're in than like vegetable related. And they're just like a delightful food. They're in the same way that I would just like sit and eat a pint of berries, I would sit and eat a pint of these. And they're just really unusual and beautiful. And although they're native to Mexico and Central America, but they have been grown in the United States like as early as 1837 on the East Coast. And they just sort of deserve a little bit more I don't know, like put them in your garden, buy them at the farmer's market, give them a whirl. Like they should be more popular than I think that they are, but they're like getting there. I'm starting to see them more places.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that they were in the tomatillo family, I was like, ooh, I want to make salsa out of them. That
Oh my
sounds
gosh.
really cool. That'd be like a fun salsa.
Yeah, and you need that little bit of acid to, yeah. Ooh, okay. Let me know how it goes.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, one of James Beard's favorite strawberries that you've probably never heard of. So we, last summer, had a strawberry tasting episode. And we just like tasted all of these strawberries that were grown that are here in Oregon.
Yes.
And so it was really fun I didn't know there were so many different types of strawberries. And this is one we didn't cover. So this is really exciting. The Marshall strawberry, especially since it's one of James Beard's favorite strawberries. I mean, James Beard is from Portland. One of his favorite Portland foods is like these like coastal strawberries. And I wondered if they were the same strawberry.
Yeah. Okay. So the Marshall strawberry, and I kind of love the language, like looking at the essay in the Arc of Taste. It says it was discovered about 130 years ago by Marshall Ewell, actually in Massachusetts originally. And that is what happens a lot of the times with that. Sometimes there is very specific, thoughtful breeding. And sometimes it's like, oh, what's this? You know, like things just happen. They're growing on the edge of a field and then you realize it's delicious. And then it's sort of cloned and bred from there too. So it is interesting in that this plant originated in Massachusetts, but then really sort of came into its own in the Pacific Northwest, that it seems that the growing conditions in Oregon were really like what it wanted. Okay, so yeah, it's a soft strawberry. It basically is within a day after you pick it, it's just like, I'm done. I'm out. It's like mushy. It's out. So it was normally sold via processing. And at one time, like sort of in the early era of frozen foods, it was basically made up for the largest volume of frozen strawberries. Like about 90% of Oregon and Washington strawberry acreage was devoted to the Marshall variety to be sold frozen on the market. So in a way, it's fascinating that you tasted a diversity of local strawberries, because if this were the first half of the 20th century, it would all be Marshalls. So then it had difficulty with disease. It wasn't very disease resistant. And so it was pretty quickly phased out in the 1960s. Again, not only for more disease resistant plants, but also for ones that you could like, you know, the ones that taste like water that are in the grocery store today, essentially.
Gross.
Right? But they're like firm and you can ship them and da-da-da. So you've got a USDA germplasm repository up there that basically had living material from the Marshall. It's unclear if it was being grown or if they had seeds or if they had cuttings in storage or what it was. It can often be any of these things. And so they were able to bring the Marshall back and begin distributing it and propagating it. And so now you can find it again at a couple of different plant suppliers in the Oregon area that will ship them to you.
It's crazy because the story of the Marshall strawberry also uncovered a piece of history from Oregon and Washington I was not aware of, which was that from 1905 to 1955, this area was the world's largest volume of frozen strawberries.
You're big on berries up there.
Yeah.
I mean, now it's raspberries a little bit more than strawberries. We find strawberries coming from like the South, which I think is sort of interesting. But you never know how that's going to shift again.
But the reason I brought that up, Sarah, was because it's crazy how, you know, they found a way to market it in the early 19th century. They found probably something cheaper or something else. And this strawberry just went by the wayside and it almost got like wiped out completely, as you said, which is kind of, to me, I'm just like, it was so popular at one point. And now it's like, well, like you said, like we can't even find it at like farmers markets.
Well, we can't find it at farmers markets, one, because it's a berry that has to be processed. Like it loses its peak ripeness so quickly that when it was being grown on these, you know, vast berry farms, it was going right into the freezer. They were processing right away, which also in general is why frozen fruits and vegetables are great, because that's still what's happening today. And there are also winter CSAs out there that do exactly that. They freeze bumper crops from farmers and you get these like peak ripeness frozen berries and vegetables and things like that. However, what you're actually bringing up, Claudia, is the danger of monoculture monoculture, because the reason that the Marshall disappeared is because it was nearly wiped out by disease. So when 90% of your acreage is planted with one variety of strawberry, if a disease hits 1 acre, that's it. Everything else is donezo. So having one plant in your backyard is going to do fine. But we've also bred plants to be disease resistant because we continue to plant monocrops, vast monocultures of one plants in our country.
Yeah. So I'm curious, do you think certain foods in Portland that exist now could, if we had our own Arc of Taste, could be included in this?
Yeah,
this
and
thing?
You do.
Could you think of one? Because immediately we were talking about it and we're like, oh, the tacho.
What's a tacho?
So I don't know if you know this, but the tater tot was invented in Oregon.
That's right.
And the tacho, which again could be discussed if it's a nacho or if it's just but it's called a tacho because it's like nacho style tater tots.
A tacho is a variation of the core ingredient, which is the tater tot. It would be like Portland style tater tots in the entry. And I can already feel foodies, like slow foodies, getting angry at this conversation. And here I am going to push back. Okay. Because it's a processed food. But the idea of the Arc of Taste, that things have to be good, clean, fair. Basically, it's good food that is replicable, right? And anyone can make a tater tot, right? It is commercialized, but it's the idea of the form and the shape of something. And I want to say, too, that slow food was started in Italy. And so a lot of the rules for the early European Arc of Taste was it needs to be made in this place for more than 100 years and have this hyper-local legacy. And when that came to America, that didn't work here. We're a younger country. We're a constantly changing country, because I still feel like there's this culture where if you write a well-researched essay on the beauty of the tater tot, someone's going to be like, no, we can't have tater tots. But how is a tater tot different than a cheese that's been made a certain way for 100 years, right? So this is an interesting ongoing cultural battle between who we are in America as this ever-changing, multicultural, immigrant, African, indigenous, and white European country, right? That there's so many different things going on here, that we don't fit the traditional rules. So I support you.
So you're saying the tacho is the perfect example.
The tacho will be an example in the entry for the tater tots, because the tacho is a dish. The tater tot is the core ingredient. So you can have a made food, but it can't necessarily be a dish. But that doesn't even 100% hold up, because one of the other entries from your area is the sayo kolache,
which is a dish.
Yeah, a little baked good with jam in the middle. But there's tons of European baked goods on there. And actually a lot of Central American ones too, and breads and things like that. But not as many from North America.
That's not an ingredient.
Yeah.
I'm saying tacho. Can I tell you the reason why the tater tot was? Because, you were just slow
please.
food or whatever. So the tater tot was created because these brothers, from Ore-Ida in Oregon and Idaho, we're just wow, we have a lot of waste after we make hash browns and French fries and all these things. What if all that waste was put in a little nugget form? We already know these animals will eat hash browns.
Delicious.
What if we made them little nuggets?
Yeah.
We can call them a little tater tot.
That's nose to tail potato eating. Listen, I think we're actually really getting into something, because I don't moralize food. It really irritates me, and the arbitrary rules irritate me. And here's the example that I'm thinking of. I watched a documentary where a British chef basically went to West Virginia and was like, aren't Americans so fat and gross? And then he demonstrated, you can find on YouTube, how a chicken nugget is made, and how it's made from a chicken carcass, and uses every part of the animal, and it's pureed and made into quote unquote pink slime and then fried in chicken nugget form. And at the end, it was a class of third graders who was like, now who would eat this? Expecting them to be like, this is disgusting. And 95% of the kids put their hands up. And I was like, yeah, I would eat that. So if we're advocating nose to tail eating, then where does that end? Why is that okay if you're a high-end restaurant that employs a lot of white people and serves to white people with money? Why is nose to tail chic and important in that environment? But if you grind up a chicken carcass to use every piece of it and make a delicious food out of it, that's disgusting. These are my questions about how we treat food in America.
And with that, Sarah, thank you so much. No, mean, like, what else? It's like mic drop. Yeah. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking through some of these amazing foods that we have here in this area that are part of this arc, which is so cool that it made it.
And if I can just say a little bit of a call to action, anyone can submit an item for the Arc of Taste. This is not something that is, I mean, there's gatekeeping later on, but in terms of starting these food conversations about what's important to you locally, every one of us can do that, and I highly encourage you to do so. It's all about, like, bringing attention to something that's culturally important in your community and making sure it sticks around.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out.
Yeah, this is delightful. I'm so glad we could do this.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you again when you're able to come back with a paperback version of your book.
Yeah, I'm hoping in the fall. I would love to come to Powell's. It was a fascinating time to be in Portland, but would have been nice to be able to do my book talk too. Thanks, weather. Oh, but I got to see all those crows, which was one of the craziest. I know you're trying to wrap up, and I'm just like, Portland's so great. 15,000 crows. I'm in my taxi leaving, and I'm like, well, the next block surely won't be filled with crows. The next block is full with crows. What is happening? I know it's like no thing to all you all in Portland.
It's not, yeah.
It was wild to me. I've never seen or heard anything like that.
I can't wait for you to see the hawks that go out. I can't wait for you to experience that because it's a whole deal in the summer, especially.
I know you don't want to do that episode, but I'm here for it. I want to know everything.
Okay, we will do a Portland Crow episode just for you, Sarah.
Yay! Thank you.
Now for some events coming up this week. This Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., OMSI is hosting its free annual Brain Fair. You can learn all about what our noggins can do with plenty of hands-on exhibits and displays. This one seems like a perfect activity for the kids. Also, the Wooden Shoe Tulip Farm announced they have reached peak bloom if you haven't gone or have always wanted to check it out like me. And the largest clothing swap in the Northwest will be held at the Crystal Ballroom this Sunday starting at noon. Just $10 and a bag of clothes gets you a whole new wardrobe. That's what they're advertising. Finally, if you haven't heard, April is Filipino Food Month, and this year Portland is hosting the first ever Filipino Food Month crawl, Sobrang Sarap, which I learned means very delicious in Tagalog. For even more local events and news, sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Portland. We'll throw all links in the show notes. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.